think it was Errol Levy. Errol Levy also said that. Errol Levy, her parents were actually involved in Planned Parenthood. She's not at all secular. Yasmin Mujahid actually said that, but now Yasmin Mujahid is Muslim, so she does have that religious bias. But Errol Levy, her parents they're not religious at all. But her book is so fascinating because she's just saying from like an observational point of view, like what's going on here, because she made these observations about how like how women are trying to be like porn stars.
Yeah.
And she says like, okay, but like how is that feminism? How is that sex positive? But like that's only pleasing the males. You understand? So that's not about you and what you want and how you feel. It's about how you look.
Yes,
And
and see, it's still in relation to a man. It's whether a man approves of it or not.
mm,
So women on women, you know this, and I mean one doesn't have to look at text or sources. You just see it around you. Who are the most judgmental? It's us. You know, oh my God, she's gone so fat. Oh my God, can't she do something about the skin? Oh my God, you know we set the bar, but where do we get the bar from? It's from what men have imprinted in us. You know, so chances of you displaying yourself in public when you're full of stretch marks, and you know it's going to take you a lot more time to. And then women who do that, how are they framed? Oh my gosh, she's so brave. I mean, with those stretch marks and those rolls around the
that's
hips
why
and
I'm
that
always
kind
so
of thing.
amused when they say, "Oh, the Muslim men want to cover their women." No, that wasn't the men's idea. It was Allah's idea.
Exactly. Yes. So
Do you know
for
they're
me,
men?
so exactly all of this only in relation to a man.
Yeah.
And I, as a grown woman, I don't mind if somebody should, you know, identify me in such a way, because there's also life experience behind it, but somebody shouldn't assume that I'm a nothing without so and so. And that is where the problem lies, I think, for the most part, for me, if I look at at how easily.
Okay, we have 22 minutes. Is that okay?
Welcome back to Community Pulse on 100.4 FM. We're now into the second half of our social justice matters. I always stumble over this word. Of our matters pertaining to social justice segment. We're now into the second half of that. In studio with us, we have Sister Lillah, who's of course unpacking today's theme, which is all about the best and the worst of us. This is as we entered the season of Asiyah. Along with the new year of 2023, we've unpacked a few themes since then. Today, Sister Lillah paused for a few minutes, and this was during the first half, to unpack the term maternalist. This is, of course, a question that came from one of our listeners. And so just to sort of locate the research and where it's, and where in it is framed. Again, the questions that do come through, or the comments, we do pass it on to Sister Lillah. And if it's within the frame of the research, or if it falls in line with that, she will endeavor to respond to that either today or next week. But until to today's theme that we're talking about, Sister Lillah, that's the best and the worst of us.
Yes, I'm still getting to that. I just want to do a quick little recap, because that question does conveniently help us to bridge into this particular theme. So before the break, we were talking about materialism versus feminism, and how feminism started off as a good movement regarding women's rights, but you know we still require it because there's hypocrisy and there's still abuse towards women. But unfortunately it gets hijacked and it becomes a hypocrisy in itself. It becomes misandry, which is basically the like misogyny is like hatred or contempt towards women. Misandry is contempt towards men, and so we're dealing with that a lot at the moment. And before the break, we were talking about how maternalism, or you could also say paternalism, is about responsibility and how the accountability and the authority has to match. And then I just wanted to note as well that in Islam, you know, Islam becomes like a filter for civilizations, where we take the best of all worlds. Whatever's halal, whatever's appropriate, whatever fits into our beliefs as Muslims. You know, when it comes to, when we look at the maternalism in terms of the history and its ideology and its socio-political format, does it fit into our deen? Does it fit into our role as Muslims? And the reason why I've included it into the title and the discussion is because in actual fact it does, because it benefits us on all levels in terms of, assisting the community, our spiritual development, our activism, our concern for, the vulnerable of society, and so on and so forth. So I use the four. Previously, I've used the four best women as examples. For example, Asiyah alayhi salam, her activism, Miriam alayhi salam, her religiousness and her spirituality, Khadija alayhi salam, who even before she got married, she was somebody that was very active in the community in terms of giving and charity. And then, of course, like Fatima alayhi salam, being this pivotal, especially in her traditional role as a housewife and a mother, and the value of that and the honor in that. So, we look at these women, like you said, it's about relation to me. But you see, here's the thing: it is actually now we come full circle, because it is actually about our relationship with men as well. Because if you look at the best of women, so we have the Anbiya, who are the best of men, right? But who would they be without their woman? Whether it's an adoptive mother, whether it's a biological mother, whether it's the mother who nurses the child, whether it's the sister that helps, whether it's the wife that supports, where would these men be? Where would the best of men be without the best of women? And so when I think back historically, if I look at, for example, pre-Christian civilization in Europe or pre-Islamic civilization in Arabia, I don't think we appreciate enough what a much more comfortable and safe situation we are in, had it not been for these people. And look, the religious aspect aside, in terms of how it affects our akhirah, that of course cannot be denied or compared. But even from a secular point of view, people don't appreciate what this world would be like had it not been for the Prophet Muhammad SAW dominating the Arabian Peninsula with the spread of Islam, or what Europe would be like, even though Christianity may have deviated in some ways. Still, if you look at your pre-Christianity, the world would be in a much, much darker, far worse place had these people not played the roles that they did, in particularly the woman. So it's something that we tend to take for granted, that even our traditional roles can have such a massive ripple effect on the rest of the world and society in ages to come. Subhanallah. So what I wanted to do today, now we're coming to the theme of the best of us and the worst of us, because what I did is I wrote an article, I think a couple of years back, about how the four best women. Now, if I had to do a discussion on how the Prophet Muhammad SAW was the antithesis of a narcissist, I don't think I'd be able to finish that discussion. You would need a segment by itself just for that discussion, because that is a very long list of how the Prophet Muhammad SAW is the antithesis of narcissism. I wouldn't know where to start. I wouldn't know where to stop. Now, with the four women, it's a little bit easier. It's a bit easier to summarize, inshallah. Now, I discussed a couple of weeks back, like, I'm not qualified to diagnose narcissism. There is a diagnostic manual for that. There are, qualified psychologists, behavioral psychologists, and clinicians that do diagnose narcissism. But what I have said before, and these are just things that people need to just watch out for, is that you'll find there's this sort of triangle of egotism, fantasism, and lack of empathy that a person seems to get stuck in. And because they're stuck between these three qualities, these three vices seem to feed off each other and keep the person stuck in that loop, so to speak. So now, if these things occupy the same space as narcissism consistently, then what is the opposite of that? The opposite of that would be humility, then also compassion, then also truth-based or realistic. So somebody that acknowledges things as they are, somebody that embraces the truth, whether it's the truth of Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala in general, and somebody who has the rahmah, somebody who's compassionate, who's not non-empathetic, and somebody finally who is humble, who's willing to prostrate, who's willing to submit, and who's willing to give of themselves for higher calling and purpose. So those would be, like, superficially speaking, the opposite qualities of a narcissist. Okay, so now we talked about the four types of narcissists, and I'll just mention them briefly now. We mentioned the malignant narcissist. The malignant narcissist is the cruel and abusive narcissist. They're the ones that go into rage and they attack people. There's the communal narcissist. It's the one that likes to do things to show off. They give to charity to be seen, give in charity. Those that pray to be seen of praying. So the communal narcissism can be applicable to religious hypocrisy as well as just, general, trying to be seen as, you see it in social media, like the virtue signaling, like, when hashtag Black Lives Matters, and a lot of people jumping on that bandwagon to be cool. And there's people that'll do like hashtags Martin Luther King, but they're taking pictures of themselves posing, which is very odd. But anyway, so that's communal narcissism. And then you get grandiose narcissisms, like, look at me, look at my big house, look at my big car, look at my bling bling, my this and my that. That's grandiose narcissism. And then you get petulant narcissism. That's the person that's more covert, and they tend to be more negative. Petulant means that they're sulking and that they're not happy, they're ungrateful, and they basically pretty much self-centered. They're not as grandiose or over the top, but it's still ego-based if you think about it. So I was looking at the 4 best women, and I noticed that Asiyah alayhi salam in many ways is like the antithesis, or in terms of her story, she symbolizes and represents the opposite of the malignant, because she represents that compassionate, like she finds this baby, she's protective of the baby, she is desperate or anxious to find a nurse mother for the child, and then she's also moved by the story of the hairdresser and her children. So she is somebody that when you think of Asiyah, with all the women, but particularly her in terms of the way her story is framed, there's that strong theme of rahma and her being compassionate and forbearing. That's very much like in opposition to Firawn's being malignant. He's abusive, he's a tyrant, he wants to kill the babies, he tortures the magicians, kills them off, he boils the hairdresser's children in front of her before he kills her, basically tortures Asiyah alayhi salam, drops the rock on her. So this man is completely malignant, and she, by contrast to that, is this very caring, compassionate, merciful, empathetic woman. And it's interesting because the theme, you always find that empaths and narcissists do tend to go together. That's a study that's been consistent. That in Firawn's case, he had a lot of wives. So it's not as if she was exclusively the only wife, if it is the man that we think he is. But it is a theme that empaths and narcissists, especially the malignant type, do tend to go together somehow. And then you have Maryam alayhi salam. And what's interesting about her is that she's got her screen. She's constantly in hiding. She's in her mihrab. So she's worshipping, but she's always doing it. It's a very private, personal, quiet thing with her. It's not, hey, well, look at me, I'm religious. And it's interesting because if you study the historical backdrop to her situation, there's a lot of that communal narcissism and that hypocrisy of people like, oh, look at me, we're very religious. And there's so many different examples of that. You had the Pharisee hypocrites with the big, I forgot what they're called, but they used to dress in such a way so that you could see that they were very religious. And then you had the other types of religious groups that used to like go off grid, and they used to like make themselves quite dirty. And there's even reference in the Bible, like, if you're going to fast, be presentable, don't draw attention to yourself. Don't constantly try to show people that you're religious or you're charitable, what have you. So the theme in the story of Maryam alayhi salam is that of being private, being quiet, being intimate in your faith and connecting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala, basically being unseen to connect to the unseen. That is Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala. So that's very much the antithesis of the communal narcissism, where you're going to go deep and be more quiet and private about it. And then you've got Khadija alayhi salam. She is the antithesis of the grandiose. We had this discussion last year, remember, about, we were talking about Dan Locke. How people make money, but then it's like, look at my this, look at my that. And then Khadija alayhi salam, she was like, I encourage free market systems and people being entrepreneurial, but there has to be that other goal in mind. Then you also have to learn how to detach from the materialism, which is a whole nother skill set in itself. And Khadija alayhi salam, not only did she have these skill sets where she could grow in terms of her income, grow her wealth, but she had the ability to detach from these things for the higher purpose. So she's the complete opposite of the grandiose. This is somebody who, when she was buried, the Prophet Muhammad struggled to find a proper sheet to bury her in. So this is not somebody who's making a lot of money to show off and say, hey, look at my car, look at my mansion, look at my this and this and that, but the complete opposite of grandiose. So that's another inspiration that we have to latch onto and look at, inshallah. And then Fatima alayhi salam, the anti-petulant. And this one's actually kind of obvious because if you look at the tasbih of Fatima, Subhanallah, Alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, Alhamdulillah, all praise be to Allah. So your hands are raw, you're working, you're tired, the husband's back is sore, you've got these rough conditions, but you're saying, Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, Allahu Akbar. And this is a family full of love and laughter. And even though times are tough and they're struggling financially and they're tired and they're hardworking and they've got their aches and their pains, but they're laughing, and there's a lot of love and there's a lot of flirtation in the marriage. There's a lot of gratitude. There's a lot of positivity, and a beautiful example of like the anti-petulant narcissists, people that are just always very positive, very grateful, and appreciative. So if you look at Alhamdulillah, that's all praise to Allah. That is the best form of gratitude, is to say Alhamdulillah, Subhanallah, is glory be to Allah. And for me, this is interesting because if you think of Fatima alayhi salam in her hands and how she used to work until her hands were raw, and women today, they've got their I don't know if you see their fingernails, their manicures. I can't touch anything. Oh, I might break a nail. It's a self-glorification. You understand? She's the complete opposite of that. Subhanallah, And then finally, Allahu Akbar, which of course is because Allah's the greatest, therefore there is that humility of submitting to Allah subhanahu wa ta'ala as the greatest. Because the narcissist thinks that he or she is the greatest. They're always trying to make themselves greater instead of just embracing, look, Allahu Akbar. So
that's very interesting, because now I look at all of these women and I realize the value in having an extended discussion around narcissism, and extending that discussion into sort of different archetypes of, and what stands out, yes, of course, there's something overarching about narcissists, the idea of as when we spoke about the ego, foregrounding the ego, the lack of empathy, of course, and this idea of fantasizing or living in this particular world. But yes, of course, if you look at each of them, and as we've identified the malignant, the petulant, the grandiose, and the communal, you see the exact opposite in these qualities that were foregrounded in these four women.
Now, if you look at the men with these women, that's why I'm too scared to even go there, because we're not going to be able to stop having this discussion. If we start talking about the men around them, we start talking about Musa alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam, the Prophet Muhammad sallallahu alaihi wasallam.
We spoke about firawn briefly.
Yeah, very briefly. But see, in terms of how the men also have these qualities, between the women and the men and the families, it's gonna that conversation is gonna go on forever. So alhamdulillah that the women, we have four women that can nicely summarize these particular themes, because I think as Muslims, we get very caught up on who's a narcissist and so on and so forth, but we need to check, where are we being narcissistic, and how can we be the opposite of that, and what is the opposite of that? So instead of if we do need to check ourselves, we do need to check, do I have an ego? Am I being a fantasist? Am I being unempathetic?
I think we alluded to that last week in last week's discussion, when so many people would ask us, and I mean, we made that clear that you're not here as a counselor or somebody to diagnose anybody. You're here and you can refer people to sources, as you just did again earlier on. But yes, so then we into this game of labeling everybody else around us and problematizing everybody around ourselves, of course, without checking.
Because there are actually a lot of people who are narcissists who are not self-aware, who actually do that. They actually go around labeling people, and then they use the same strategies. So it's very important that we check ourselves. Like I said, we have to set our boundaries and try to be impersonal about that. But then, my philosophy is that if you aim bigger, you let smaller things fall into place. So if you are growing in compassion, you're growing in the humility that is in alignment with the appreciation of Allahu Akbar. If you're growing in your strength in terms of standing on the truth, the haqq, if we're growing as Muslims, you're growing in faith, you're growing in good qualities, everything else will fit into place, inshallah. And just as an interesting note, I think it was Dr. Gabor, he did a study of people, of adults who, over the age of 35 years, they were reviewed, I think, from a young age. They found in the study that there were three groups. There were people that weren't loved at all as children, people that were got a reasonable amount of love and affection. And then there was a third group of those that got a lot of love and a lot of maternal love and affection. And it was found that those above the age of 35 were actually the most successful in terms of being self-adjusted adults, in terms of their relationships and their professions, what have you. And so what the study concluded is that you actually cannot have enough maternal love and support. So again, we don't want that limited to the biological, because it's not limited, as Asiyah alayhi salam showed us. In fact, they've all shown us that this is not limited to the biological, but it actually extends much further to society. And so we have to cultivate that, especially for the children, those that are more vulnerable than ourselves. Aunts, sorry, nephews, nieces, and so on and so forth. So, it's interesting to notice how even the role of maternalism, when we're talking about these 4 women who are very maternal, and how not only are they the antithesis of narcissism, but their roles as loving maternal beings are also connected to the greater qualities of the men that they supported and assisted as well. There's a connection there, and there's a massive ripple effect on the rest of the world and society up until today because of this.
Yeah, it does make absolute sense again, as long as the starting point is not what it almost instinctively conjures up us. When we think maternal, when we think nurturing, when we think compassion, we think of a woman who shouldn't all, who should ideally be in a corner somewhere, clad in head to toe, and
she's
just
trapped,
not have
she's
a
trapped
voice,
in that role.
just not have a voice,
No.
and this is what you do. So as long as, I suppose, yes, we understand that when we speak about maternal love, we speak about security, we're speaking about how children grow up, then it's the responsibility of a much bigger group of people, a much larger group of people.
That has a voice.
Of course.
It's a much broader,
Of course.
broader net and definition,
Yes.
with a louder voice, definitely.
Yeah, and the ripple effects, as we alluded to last week, the ripple effects, it benefits a whole society. That's essentially what happened. Sister Lillah, I think we have about 3-4 minutes left.
3-4 minutes
That's
left.
how quickly the time. Yeah, that's how quickly the time. And I know there's 1 or 2 thoughts you still wanted to share.
Well,
with us.
it's quite specific. I was busy chatting to one of your colleagues. Firawn, he's been described as like the ultimate narcissist, and we mentioned H.G. Tudor, and how he's the internal dialogue of Firawn, basically. So H.G. Tudor, he says that narcissists are bred, because we're talking about like how the link between the maternalism and the anti-narcissism. So H.G. Tudor mentioned that in his case, he was physically abused, sexually abused, and then he had this experience where he just was never good enough for his parents. Like, if he got a B, they said, why didn't you get an A? If he came second in a race, why didn't you come first? And I noticed with Firawn, if it is the person that we all think he is, Ramesses II, there was a lot of that in his childhood too. He was given a harem at the age of 10. He had to lead wars as a teenager. So he was subjected to also these high expectations. And so there was no like you just loved for just existing. Allah says be and you are, and you're just loved because you are there. And that's what maternal love does. It loves and embraces you and accepts you for just existing and being. Yeah, and there's a lack of that with a narcissist.
So with them, yes, it shows what the absence
that's
of
why
that
there's
maternal
that
love
competition
enables.
as well. There's that heavy competition with them as well, and that anxiety to always show off or to get attention, because there's that absence.
Yeah, so on the one hand, showing what it can potentially do, and on the other hand, with the absence of which, not necessarily, of course, for everybody, but those that are inclined in some way or the other.
Yeah, there's a genetic disposition. Yes.
So we'll continue this discussion next week, inshallah. Shukran, Sister Lillah, as always, for a robust discussion. And go well until next week, inshallah. Assalamu alaikum.
Wa alaikum salam wa rahmatullahi wa barakatuh.
That, of course, Sister Lillah unpacking her thoughts around today's theme, which is the best and the worst of us. This is, of course, in line with us having started the season of Asiyah as we entered the year 2023. Sister Lillah, of course, broader research is based. Sister Lillah, maybe just an indication of where this research is available,
the Maternalist Quartet. So if you Google it, you'll find it on Google Business as a research center. It is on YouTube. The YouTube has in its bio, it's got the Substacks. And it should be, okay, no, the Google Business won't be on there. So on YouTube, you're just going to find the Substacks, and you'll find the YouTube and the Substacks if you go to Google Business. So if you just research the Maternalist Quartet, and you can also go straight to YouTube and then type in the Maternalist Quartet as well.
And you will find it there. All the research, because a lot of the detail, of course, we do not have time to go into all the detail. But for those of you who would like to read further and continue your research, you can Google the Maternalist Quartet and you will find it, as Sister Lillah just pointed out. But that, of course, is how we wrap up today's social justice matters. It also concludes today's edition of Community Pulse. Up next,